Nick right now to take us through some key MRR metrics, what we should all be aware of as SaaS marketers, growth people, and know the MRR metrics. Nice. So while we wire up Nick, all right, there we go.
Sorry, carry on.
No, you're good.
All right. Okay. Is that working? No, I just totally pressed the button on it while I was. I totally just pressed something on it while I was. Okay, I think it's back.
You good? All right.
Is it back?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it green there? Yeah, you're good.
Okay, cool.
And you want to speak into that one too.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Cool. Let me get started then. Okay, yeah, my name's Nick. Like 3 out of 4 of the people here, I also used to work at Zendesk. That's such a coincidence, right? I'm the founder and CEO of ChartMogul. I thought I'd put this in because I used to run Asia for Zendesk, and this is a team out in Asia, which JD and Guy might recognize. But ChartMogul, yeah, our mission as a company is we help subscription businesses measure, understand, and grow their recurring revenue. We're a BI company. We build an analytics platform that basically, we call it kind of, instead of business intelligence, we call it subscription intelligence, and it basically allows you to sort of understand and measure and understand and sort of grow your revenue through data. But anyway, this presentation, I'm going to talk about SaaS metrics. This topic has probably, a lot of the stuff might be very familiar to everyone in the room, so I apologize there. Everyone has a SaaS metrics cheat sheet on their desk. This is one of the pieces of content we made around 13 months ago, and it's kind of become quite popular. So we're going to talk about some of the things on this cheat sheet today, and then how later on you can actually mash in other data, marketing data perhaps, and use, instead of just looking at these metrics, you can also use them to kind of drive growth in your SaaS business. But before I get into SaaS metrics are generally concerned with once a customer pays, what happens then? How much MRR do they have? What is their lifetime value? What's the churn rate? These kind of things. But I just want to talk quickly about trial to paid conversion rates because I like to talk about this. So everyone usually measures trial to paid conversion rates, and there's just been a lot. I didn't realize the presentation before would be all about trials. But I just like to make this point that when you measure trial to paid conversion rate, that you should do it in cohorts. And instead of just saying, otherwise, how else would you do it? Like you could say, well, for January we had 500 trials and 50 new customers, so we can divide those and say, well, this is our, we have a 10% trial to paid conversion rate, but that's not really gonna, that's not very meaningful because people, as we just heard, take different periods of time to sign up for their trial. So I like to do it like this, and this is actually, JD probably recognized exactly how we did it at Zendesk, which is like, you kind of measure it in cohorts, 30-day trial to paid conversion rate, 45-day trial to paid conversion rate, 90 days, something like that. And the way you do the calculation is super simple. You just take, say you're going to do your 30-day trial to paid conversion rate for the month of January. You just take all the accounts that have their 30th day since the account was created falling in the month of January, and then you just divide that by the, you just do what percentage of those accounts are now paying. And that's your 30-day trial to paid conversion rate. And you can then do that for 90 days and extrapolate that out. You can do that for February, for March, and you create these graphs like this. And the reason it's really helpful is you can also see then, well, a lot of the time with SaaS trials, sort of 50% or more are buying like way after the trial it has expired. So this is really useful. But now I'm going to actually talk about SaaS metrics, which are generally concerned with after the customer has actually paid you some money. And this is actually from our investor report that we use. Every month I do an investor report for our VC, and we send this kind of top-level KPIs, the top of the funnel, the kind of new customer stuff, the churn rate. But today, and then the bottom, the kind of what's our burn rate and how much cash balance and everything like that. But the section that is kind of the SaaS metrics is really the this is the red box, the churn rate, MRR, etc. And So these are kind of the major metrics: customers, monthly recurring revenue. Everybody probably knows that. Annualized run rate, ARR. So ARR is one that's kind of quite confused because ARR can also stand for annual recurring revenue, which has a slightly different definition. Generally speaking, annual recurring revenue in the kind of it's hard to find really solid definitions for this, but basically if it's annual recurring revenue, you're just taking all your annual subscriptions or more than a year and summing those up, and you're actually excluding all of your monthly revenue. So what's much more, as a lot of companies now with kind of democratizing and consumerizing enterprise software are doing a lot of monthly deals, and most of our customers pay monthly, some of them pay annually, but most pay monthly, it's better to do annualized run rate, which is basically all of your subscription revenue normalized into MRR, and then times that by 12 to get the annualized annual run rate. Average revenue per account, ARPU, customer per customer, you gotta get the idea. This is like the average MRR per account usually. And then the kind of revenue and customer churn rate and lifetime value. So this is what we're gonna go through today a little bit. So everyone knows what a monthly recurring revenue, so monthly recurring revenue, everyone probably knows what this means. It's kind of like, theoretically, if all of your customers were paying monthly and you didn't get any new customers and none of them churned and they all paid on time, it's kind of like how much money you'd make next month in kind of theoretical world. So totally normalized monthly subscription revenue. And it usually looks like this if you're doing kind of okay. It goes up and to the right generally, but that's not particularly useful in and of itself. It doesn't tell you very much about the dynamics of your business. It's much better to break it out into the various movements of that. So the way this graph is probably the one that I look at most when running our business, in that it really tells me how things are going. So basically the kind of dark blue or greeny blue is the MRR from new business. The kind of light blue layered on top is MRR from expansion or upgrade revenue. The little thin layer on top is MRR from reactivation revenue. And then underneath you have the red from churn, lost MRR from churn. And some of them have a very thin bit of pink from contraction or downgrades. And the reason this is just really helpful is, first of all, you can kind of see what's falling out the bottom in churn, visualized quite well. And also you can kind of see how growth is maybe being suppressed. So one thing that's maybe obvious, but worth mentioning is that these bars, if you want to have exponential growth, these bars have to get taller every single month or quarter. Otherwise, you effectively have linear growth. And you'll see on this chart, sorry, I might get water in a second. There are like the last 4 bars have been basically the same height, and you see that we're effectively having linear growth here. So you do need those to increase in size with each month. Cool. Now I'm talking about churn. Everyone knows kind of the rough concept of churn. At the start of the month, you start with a certain number of customers. By the end of the month, how many of those have canceled their account? That's sort of logo churn. There's also MRR churn or revenue churn, and this is where SaaS companies like to use net MRR churn to kind of paint a more positive picture than there actually is in reality. So I think there's something called gross MRR churn, which is kind of the total of all the lost revenue, the lost MRR from cancellations and downgrades that happen throughout the month. And that's probably what you want to focus on internally inside your company because it paints the ugliest picture, and the rate will be generally higher than the net. The net is where you offset the impact of that gross churn with the expansion revenue from upgrades. So you'll hear a lot about like a lot of the public SaaS companies, Zendesk was one of them, New Relic. Every time someone adds, or Salesforce, every time someone adds a salesperson in a Salesforce seat or a support person in a Zendesk seat, they expand their account, and that happens at a rate greater than the cancellation rate. So they have net negative churn. So if you want to, if you're doing an investor pitch or something, always use the net number and sugarcoat it for sure. But for making it useful internally, it's not particularly useful to understand your churn to look at the net number. Better to look at the gross number. Just to show you most SaaS startups should aim, this was one of our investors, he wrote a blog called Most SaaS Startups Should Aim for Negative Churn, Negative Net MRR Churn. This is from Thomas Tungas, who writes a great blog. The kind of like, how that compounds over a year. If you have 5% churn, just like 5% net churn, you compounded over 12 months versus having 5% net negative churn, you end up with basically double the MRR after 12 months. So here it's 750 versus 1,500 because the cohorts basically degrade over the course of the 12 months, whereas with net negative churn, the cohorts expand. Can I grab a water? Sorry. Yeah. Sorry about that. Expand over the course of the year. It's like his mic's on too. Yeah, and many of the best-known public SaaS companies do have this negative net churn. So if you can design your pricing, seat pricing is the best way to have net churn. Excuse me, sorry. But you don't have to. HubSpot, for example, managed to build a huge company, an IPO, without. I'll go with the water for now, okay. and I'll drink that in like 10 minutes. Cool. You can still create a huge SaaS company without having negative churn. HubSpot, for example, did that. But if you can design your pricing model, your monetization model based around seats, or with New Relic, they base it around servers. But they're kind of funny about how they do it because they get a startup like us buying like maybe 2 server licenses for New Relic, and then we end up using 50 server licenses, and then they give us a call and say, hey, you're using 50, not 2. And then we say, oh, well, we're not really using all 50. And they say, well, can you just pay for 3 servers? And okay, that's okay then. So this was a call I had with our New Relic account executive the other day, and we compromised. So it's like, to 3. Yeah, that was good. But the nice thing about like seat pricing is you hire a salesperson or a support person, they can't even start work until you've given Salesforce more money, which is awesome. So if you can get away with that, then that's great. Something to kind of help you kind of reduce churn and get a handle on it is to start classifying it. There's kind of 4 major categories of churn. Kind of proactive churn, where they don't like your product, they go to your the account page, or they email your support and say, hey, I want to cancel, I'm not happy. And that's like the main thing you want to attack, really. There's also sort of passive churn, where the credit cards are expiring, all that kind of thing. And there's a bunch of tools out there that will send out dunning emails and kind of, get people to renew their credit card or fix the billing. So passive churn is really something you can do something about. Happy churn is some of our customers have products where you would only really want to use it for a few weeks. Maybe you're taking part in a political campaign, and the election is over. You no longer need a whole bunch of survey software anymore because the election's over. But they're happy. They had a great experience with your product, and they might reactivate later. A lot of survey software companies have kind of this dynamic of repeat business, or event software like Eventbrite probably has something kind of similar where the event is now over. And then there's kind of churn that isn't really churn. We kind of say, like, there are some customers where they buy and maybe you offer a money-back guarantee because you don't have a free trial perhaps, and then they decide within a few days, actually, this isn't what I wanted, can I have my money back? And you kind of want to segment that out from the other churn, because the kind of behaviors are very different than somebody who perhaps used the product for 6 months, then decided to cancel. So it's kind of different. So it's good to segment the churn out as much as possible, and only do the churn rate analysis really on monthly subscriptions. On annual subscriptions, it's kind of really far apart. Unless you have really a lot of data, it's hard to get good so much analysis. Better to use like retention rate, which is kind of the inverse of churn perhaps, but definitely do it separately. What is a reasonable level? This is always something a little bit interesting. There is one, Groove app did a survey of like a few hundred SaaS companies that sell to SMBs, and they found that monthly churn rate of customer churn rate was like 3.2%. You definitely want to have it you definitely want to have your churn as low as possible, of course, but generally speaking, if you're selling to enterprise, high ticket, high price deals, the churn rate is really low. If you're selling to SMBs, yeah, anywhere between 3 and 5% is fairly typical. If you're selling to consumers, much higher, so really high sometimes. Cohort analysis, this is a good technique for basically understanding how your kind of subscription customers evolve over their lifetime. This is always a bit confusing the first time you see it if you're not familiar with it, but basically it's very easy to demystify it. Maybe I won't attempt right now, but basically it tells you at what month in the life cycle of a group of customers is kind of like the danger month. Like, is it after 1 month or after 2 months or after 3 months? Which month is it in their life cycle that is the most highest chance that they're going to cancel? So you can have your customer success people or Autopilot send out an email or something, kind of like preempting the kind of high the danger points in the subscription life cycle to try and then reduce that. I hope that makes sense. It's kind of customer lifetime value. We were talking about this earlier. This is a clear SaaS metric. You want to obviously get that as high as you can. Most people use ARPA divided by customer churn rate. For early stage SaaS, you probably don't need to times it by gross margin or the cost of, you don't need to deduct cost of goods sold, but as you grow larger, the concept of value is connected to deducting, timesing it by the margin and doing it that way. So if you do want your LTV to be greater than CAC, then you should do that. Moving onwards. Anyway, a lot of these SaaS metrics, they're kind of nice to look at, and they're good for your internal management reporting and reporting to your investors, but they don't necessarily help you drive growth in your business. So one way you can actually use these metrics beyond just kind of informational purposes is to segment them by acquisition channel or marketing channel, something like that, or even sales rep. You could segment churn rate by sales rep and see which sales rep has a higher churn rate in general and see who's overselling perhaps, something like that. So you want to end up with something like this, which should show you MRR or customer lifetime value, but broken out by acquisition channel like Twitter, Facebook, AdWords. You could imagine all the different acquisition channels you might have, like search engine, referral link from your partners or something like that. And then segment your lifetime value and then find, okay, which of these channels produce customers that tend not to churn and tend to last longer or buy larger deals. Or which of these channels just in aggregate produce more MRR for your business. We do this at ChartMogul using a system called Ahoy. It's effectively, it's just a visitor tracking system. It's basically like the back end of Google Analytics. Mixpanel probably also does similar stuff. I'm sure HubSpot and all these things can do similar things, Segment probably also. But basically it just tracks all the visitor data, what the referral links were. It's an open source application published by Instacart. Instacart basically built their own marketing tracking system and then decided that they would open source it. So that was nice. And it just does all the visitor tracking, it's JavaScript, and tracks everything. We dump it all into a database. This is like a raw dump, but it has like all the visits. If it's the first visit, it'll track that, the referrer, UTM, campaign IDs, all that kind of stuff. Of course, it's like all attribution tracking, it's never perfect. There's a whole bunch of customers where they just end up on your website directly and you don't really know where they came from, or they looked at your site on their mobile first and then on the desktop, so the discover URL that you got wasn't really the first discover URL, but it tracks everything. We dump it on our own database. It has all that kind of stuff. It's completely free. And as soon as someone signs up for a free trial, we connect the account with the attribution, the visitor tracking data we've been collecting from them when they visited their site. And then we pump that data into different systems, CRM, our analytics system, and it allows us to answer those questions. And actually, it has produced good insights for us. We weren't, I actually turned off a bunch of our paid advertising as soon as we started properly doing this and attributing stuff back, because I realized that we were getting very few customers actually from paid advertising, even though the paid, we were using like paid Twitter ads, and things like this. And we set up all their attribution tracking for Twitter ads, and they were really claiming in the system of Twitter that they were bringing us all these trial signups. But when we started tracking it ourselves, we found that it was a lot less than Twitter were actually claiming to be sending us. So we decided to turn off a lot of the paid advertising after doing this attribution tracking. Anyway, most of the work that we do on SaaS metrics comes from these guys. Christoph Jans, who's one of our investors, David Skoke, Thomas Tungas, and Jason Lemkin are kind of the thought leaders in this space. So if you are interested to learn more about SaaS metrics, you guys probably know a lot of these guys already. For entrepreneurs, David Skoke's blog is fantastic, and this is where to learn more. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.